Prince Andrew has said he will no longer be using any of his titles or honours, including that of Duke of York.
The palace is silent, yet the world is listening. Behind closed doors, whispers echo through marble halls. Has Prince William made the unthinkable decision to ban his own uncle from royal life forever? Reports suggest that the future king has drawn an invisible line across the centuries-old monarchy, one that Prince Andrew will never be allowed to cross again. What began as whispers about Jeffrey Epstein's shadow has become a reckoning for the House of Windsor itself, a battle between blood, image, and the survival of the crown. In recent weeks, new headlines have reignited an old fire. First came revelations that Andrew would cease using his Duke of York title after intense pressure from both the king and the public. Then leaked emails reportedly tied him to an attempt to obtain private information about his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, now under active police review. Lawmakers have called for a titles removal act to strip him of remaining honors, while investigations into his lavish spending on luxury hotels added yet another layer of outrage. And at the center of it all stands Prince William, poised to inherit not just a throne, but a crisis. This isn't merely a family dispute, it's a generational judgment on what the monarchy stands for in an age where truth is louder than tradition, and where silence at last is no longer an option. Decades ago, Prince Andrew was not a symbol of scandal, but of promise. As the dashing action prince, a Royal Navy helicopter pilot during the Falklands War, he once embodied the courage and charm that Britain celebrated. His public engagements were frequent, his reputation untarnished, and his role within the royal family was secure. For years, he served as the monarchy's global representative, traveling the world as a trade envoy, shaking hands with heads of state, and projecting the soft power of a family built on tradition. But behind the pomp and prestige, the first cracks were forming. Andrew's affinity for high society and wealthy connections began to raise eyebrows. Among those connections was financier Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose charm disguised a web of manipulation and crime. Their friendship, which began in the 1990s, would come to define Andrew's downfall. At first, it seemed like another elite acquaintance in the royal circle, but when Epstein's crimes were exposed, every photograph, every dinner, every flight suddenly looked damning. As the public learned more, Andrew's world began to shrink. The infamous 2019 BBC interview, meant to clear his name, became a defining disaster, painting him as detached and unrepentant. The backlash was immediate. Charities severed ties, and he was stripped of royal duties. What had once been a golden chapter in the Windsor legacy turned into a slow-motion collapse. By the time his ties to Epstein resurfaced yet again, the tone within the palace had changed. The family that once shielded him was now shielding itself from him. King Charles sought quiet containment, but Prince William, representing a new era, seemed unwilling to inherit his uncle's shadows. Now, as new allegations emerge and old wounds reopen, the tension between tradition and accountability threatens to rewrite royal history. It began with a headline that rippled through the palace walls like a distant thunderclap. Prince William will ban Prince Andrew from all aspects of royal life. The words felt both shocking and inevitable. For years, the House of Windsor had lived in a state of uneasy denial, acknowledging Andrew's fall from grace, yet keeping him close enough to maintain the illusion of unity. But this time, insiders suggested the heir to the throne was done pretending. William, reportedly determined to preserve the monarchy's integrity, was said to have made a cold, final decision. When his reign begins, Andrew will have no role, no invitation, no presence. Not at state events, not at coronations, not even at private family gatherings. This was not merely an administrative move, it was a moral verdict. Palace sources described William's stance as zero tolerance, a phrase that cut through the layers of royal diplomacy like a blade. It marked a generational shift, a future king openly drawing a line between duty and disgrace. To the public, it was a long-awaited moment of accountability. To the family, it was an unspoken exile. Behind the grandeur of royal tradition, an old truth re-emerged. Blood may be thicker than water, but reputation is thicker than blood. Then, as if the universe conspired to test the palace's resolve, came another blow. Just days later, Prince Andrew announced that he would cease using his Duke of York title and his royal honors, an act presented as voluntary but understood to be anything but. Insiders claimed the decision followed tense discussions with with King Charles, who reportedly warned his brother that continued resistance was no longer sustainable. The gesture was meant to signal humility and self-awareness. Instead, it drew criticism for being too little, too late. After all, ceasing to use a title is not the same as being stripped of it. The distinction mattered to lawyers, to historians, and to a public that was growing tired of royal semantics. But the crisis didn't end there. In mid-October, leaked emails sent shockwaves through the British press. They allegedly revealed that years earlier, Andrew had instructed one of his personal protection officers to obtain private information about Virginia Giuffre, his accuser in the Epstein scandal. Among the data sought, according to the leaks, was her US social security number. The implication was chilling, that a royal had allegedly tried to dig up dirt on a victim of sexual abuse. The Metropolitan Police quickly confirmed they were actively looking into the claims, and the outrage was instantaneous. For victims' advocates, it was a grotesque reminder of privilege weaponized against the powerless. For the monarchy, it was another crack in the dam of public trust. As the headlines intensified, politicians began calling for something unprecedented, a formal law to strip Andrew of all remaining titles. Talk of a Titles Removal Act gained traction in Parliament, with lawmakers arguing that the monarchy could no longer rely on voluntary gestures to signal integrity. Historical comparisons were drawn to the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, when royals who sided with enemy nations during wartime were stripped of honors. The message was clear. This was not about politics. It was about principle. And just when the flames seemed high enough, another story reignited public fury. Reports surfaced that Andrew had rejected free embassy accommodations during official trips, instead choosing lavish hotels, sometimes occupying entire floors at taxpayer expense. One such stay, at Bangkok's Mandarin Oriental, allegedly cost £50,000. The image of luxury and entitlement set against a backdrop of disgrace and denial was too much for even loyal royalists to defend. By now, the narrative had shifted from embarrassment to crisis management. Each revelation didn't just tarnish Andrew, it tested the monarchy itself. King Charles was said to prefer discretion and containment, but William, according to royal observers, viewed this as a defining moral trial. Would the next generation of royalty tolerate what the previous had excused? The answer, it seemed, was taking form before the public's eyes. The combination of scandal, police scrutiny, political pressure, and moral fatigue had brought the monarchy to its breaking point, and standing at the center of it all was a future king who had decided that protecting the crown might mean severing ties of kinship. The breaking point wasn't one moment, it was the accumulation of many, but when the final door closes on Prince Andrew's royal life, it won't be the sound of punishment. It will be the echo of an institution trying, at last, to save itself. The announcement rippled across Britain like an earthquake cloaked in velvet. On the surface, the palace remained silent, issuing only a brief acknowledgement of Prince Andrew's decision to stop using his Duke of York title and royal honors. But beneath that silence, the tension was unmistakable. The move, though framed as voluntary, was widely seen as a carefully orchestrated attempt to manage a public relations disaster spiraling out of control. In corridors of power and press rooms alike, one question dominated. Was this genuine accountability or a desperate bid to protect the monarchy's image? The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Commentators called the gesture symbolic theater, arguing that as long as Andrew still legally retained his titles, nothing had truly changed. Editorials demanded real consequences, not ceremonial ones. Meanwhile, polls showed overwhelming support for Parliament to intervene, if necessary, to ensure the prince could never again hold royal status. Even among traditional royalists, there was a growing sense of exhaustion. The once proud spare prince had become, in many eyes, an unshakable liability. Then came the police confirmation. The Metropolitan Police publicly stated they were actively looking into the allegations that Andrew had asked a bodyguard to obtain confidential information about Virginia Giuffre years earlier. Though no formal charges were brought, the mere acknowledgement reignited public outrage. The story's timing, coinciding with the release of Giuffre's memoir, amplified its emotional weight. For survivors of Epstein's abuse, it was another painful reminder of power used to intimidate and silence. For Buckingham Palace, it was a communications nightmare. Each time the scandal seemed to fade, new details pulled it back into the spotlight. Within royal circles, the atmosphere grew icy. Reports described King Charles as weary and pragmatic, preferring quiet containment over confrontation. But William, sources said, viewed the scandal as a moral test, a moment that would define the monarchy's future credibility. To him, decisive separation from Andrew wasn't cruelty, it was survival. survival, that quiet rift between father and son, between preservation and principle, now symbolized a larger struggle within the crown itself. By the time lawmakers began drafting discussions around a titles removal act, it was clear that this was no longer just a personal crisis. It had evolved into a national debate about privilege, justice, and the limits of tradition. Even foreign outlets began framing it as a moment of reckoning for one of the world's most enduring institutions. And amid the noise, between press conferences, parliamentary statements, and moral outrage, Prince Andrew himself vanished from public life. No appearances, no statements, no defiance. Only absence. A man once defined by titles and appearances had become a ghost of royal consequence, lingering in the shadows of a family trying to forget him. The aftermath wasn't explosive, it was eerily quiet, a silence that spoke louder than any scandal, suggesting that this time, perhaps for the first time, the monarchy wasn't just moving on, it was moving away. Every scandal at its core is a mirror, and this one reflects far more than a fallen prince. It exposes the monarchy's ongoing struggle to adapt to a world that demands accountability rather than reverence. Prince Andrew's downfall isn't just about personal misjudgment, it's about an institution caught between the weight of bloodline and the gravity of public expectation. For centuries, titles insulated the royal family from the full consequences of their actions. But in the age of transparency and outrage, the old walls no longer hold. The truth, once whispered behind palace doors, now roars across digital headlines before the gates even open. Prince William's reported decision to ban his uncle from all aspects of royal life is more than an act of discipline. It's a generational manifesto. It signals a new kind of monarchy, one that measures worth not by lineage, but by legitimacy. For William, the challenge isn't merely preserving a crown, it's preserving credibility. Every photograph, every handshake, every silence now carries moral weight. He understands that the future of the monarchy depends on public faith, and that faith cannot coexist with scandal. His resolve, though severe, reveals the internal transformation of a royal house learning, often painfully, that reputation has replaced divine right as its true source of power. For Andrew, the story feels like a slow descent into exile, but it also embodies the paradox of privilege. He is both protected and punished by the institution he once served. His decision to cease using his titles might read as humility, yet it also underscores the monarchy's obsession with optics. Every move is choreographed, every statement filtered through the language of damage control. What the public sees as contrition, the palace may see as containment. In truth, neither is fully honest. It's the performance of accountability without the catharsis of confession. At a deeper level, this saga raises uncomfortable questions about justice and immunity. What does accountability mean when it applies selectively, when some can vanish into private estates while others face the full weight of the law? The Epstein connection lingers like a shadow that refuses to fade, not just for Andrew, but for the entire upper class that once orbited Epstein's world. The monarchy's moral reckoning mirrors society's own, a confrontation with systems that protect the powerful and silence the vulnerable. And yet, there's a tragic inevitability to it all. Andrew's fall was not a single misstep, but a series of denials, each one widening the gap between who he was and what he became. This wasn't revenge, the narration might whisper, it was containment. The palace didn't destroy him, it simply stopped defending him. In that silence lies the true cost of royal survival. The deeper truth is this: the story of Prince Andrew isn't just about one man losing status, it's about a family and a nation redefining what honor means in the 21st century. The monarchy has always been built on stories, legends of courage, sacrifice, and grace, but this time, the story being told is one of consequence. And for perhaps the first time, the crown seems willing to let that story play out, no matter who it damns. In the weeks that followed, the monarchy's carefully maintained facade began to fracture. What was once whispered in corridors was now shouted across headlines and debated in parliament. Prince Andrew's symbolic retreat from public life did little to stem the tide. If anything, it fanned it. Politicians, commentators, and citizens alike demanded something tangible, a permanent separation between the disgraced prince and the institution he had tarnished. Media coverage turned relentless. Every talk show, every front page seemed to ask the same question. If accountability means anything, why does he still hold a title? Lawmakers began drafting proposals for a titles removal act, citing historical precedents like the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917. The idea of stripping a royal of his name and standing had once been unthinkable. Now it was mainstream debate. Polls revealed overwhelming public support for total revocation. The monarchy, once untouchable, was being forced into a modern reckoning between heritage and justice. In Inside the palace, the atmosphere was quieter, but far more tense. King Charles reportedly hoped to contain the crisis through silence, maintaining the royal code of never complain, never explain. But Prince William seemed to represent a new philosophy: clean the slate, no matter the pain. Sources close to him described his mood as resolute, not cruel, but firm. To him, every indulgence, every controversy, from alleged misuse of public funds to lavish hotel stays instead of embassy quarters, was one more nail in the coffin of public trust. By late October, the damage was irreversible. The narrative had shifted beyond Andrew's individual disgrace to something larger. The monarchy's struggle to remain credible in a century that no longer forgives quietly. For the public, closure would not come through a statement. It would come through absence. Andrew's name vanished from royal schedules, from public documents, from official acknowledgements. In place of ceremony, there was omission, and that silence became its own kind of ending. Not a grand announcement, but a void. For the first time in living memory, a royal had not been cast out by law or scandal alone, but by the quiet, deliberate decision of family. It wasn't punishment, it was preservation. The monarchy, at least for now, had chosen survival over sentiment. The palace is quieter now, eerily so. Once Prince Andrew's name echoed through banquets, ceremonies, and balcony appearances. Today it exists only in absence. No title, no uniform, no mention. The silence feels deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though the monarchy has chosen erasure as its final form of punishment. Yet within that silence lies a powerful message. The institution is learning to protect itself, even from its own blood. In many ways, this moment marks the end of an era. The old rules, duty before truth, loyalty before accountability, are dissolving. In their place stands a new principle. Image and integrity cannot coexist with scandal. Prince William's reported decision to draw a permanent boundary around his uncle is not just an act of discipline, it's a statement of survival. It shows that the next generation of royalty understands what the previous could not. That power without trust is a hollow crown. And still, a trace of tragedy lingers. For Andrew, isolation is the price of denial. For the royal family, the cost is far deeper. Public faith, fractured and slow to heal. The scandal will fade, but the echo remains, reminding them that silence can no longer shield the truth. This wasn't revenge, it was evolution. The crown didn't cast him out, it outgrew him.